This video is an overview of forces of convergence that all play a role in the process, the larger process that we know as globalization in politics. And I'll go over each one and discuss a little bit how they contribute to a more globalized world in the sense of how they challenge the traditional view we've had of state sovereignty and how they lead to states becoming more interdependent on each other, and thus how each of these forces contribute to more engagement between governments and more cooperation, really, between governments, even though, of course, those institutionalized forms of cooperation like the EU or APEC or NAFTA and so on should not be seen as without problems and without conflict and so on. It's globalization and the process towards globalization and the forces of convergence that create this interdependence should not be seen as forces that eliminate conflict. It should be seen as a challenge to the way that we've been thinking about states as solitary actors that can act with complete authority within their own territory. And that's the status that is being challenged. So let's start. First, economics, really. So, and this is the reason this is first is because, of course, so many people, when they think about globalization, they think often about the quicker movement of capital, the quicker movement of goods and services, and capital flows across the planet. And we can see this in the sense of the homogenization of available goods and services. Anywhere you go, you'll probably pretty much be able to pick up a Coke, or most likely be able to go to a McDonald's somewhere around. Um, there was a joke once by a Swedish comedian, and this goes back decades. He was talking about an expedition into the jungles of some exotic place where they had gone so far away that they could no longer hear the Coca-Cola trucks. So that was kind of an indicator of and this was back in the 70s even, just how pervasive uh, the reach of the products of a single company have become. Uh, and it also means that there is this increasing dependency on each other. The OPEC oil crisis is an excellent example of this. Here's a situation where one particular good, one particular merchandise, oil, is rationed by the supplier, and it affects the entire world at once because everyone is dependent on oil. There are other such goods, and these types of goods and resources are not evenly distributed across the world. So economies today are interlinked with each other, and what happens in one place will affect others. And you'll find this also in natural disasters that affect production centers of some of these vital and strategic goods. A few years back, there was an earthquake on Taiwan, and as a result, it became more difficult to get a hold of certain spare parts to computers because those particular production centers were affected by that disaster. So what happens in one part of the world economically will affect others. Moving on to the environment, this is really one of these things that is so much talked about today. Obviously, climate change, global warming. Even though there's discussions about how fast it might be occurring and what the exact effects will be, there seems to be a very strong consensus among the scientists working on this that it is happening and it's driven by human activity. And certainly any given environmental problem cares very little about borders. Borders is a human construction. It's a construction of governments, and nature just doesn't care. If you pollute a river, the pollution will be downstreams. Doesn't matter if there's a state border somewhere along the river. Then the people in the other state will be affected. Same thing with anything that happens to the air and the atmosphere. And of course, here in Canada, the discussions about the relationship with the US has at times been affected by how pollution travels between these two countries because of different environmental protection standards and so on. For instance, acid rain being fueled by some industries in the United States, and what's the state of the environment of the Great Lakes, which of course is going to affect both Canadians and Americans. So these environmental issues is one of these other issues when it's really difficult for single government to go at it alone, because what happens in other across the border will affect the citizens on this side of the border, and of course global warming very much. The discussion about global warming very much fueled by Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, which was one of these flashpoints for public debates. It's also compelled the public debate to go from uh, discussions about how global processes can be affected by local action. You'll find this if you look at people active in the community in favor of buying locally made produce, for instance, and the rationale being, of course, that if you do this, you will limit carbon emissions because goods have not traveled that far from the local farms and so on and so forth. So this is a way for people to raise awareness about the interconnectedness of human activity across the planet. Of course, again, relating back to economy, but also in terms of starting to demand action from politicians and demand that politicians act together across state borders. And of course, the Kyoto Protocol is an excellent example of this, and the critique of its failings and the critique of, has it been comprehensive enough? Has it done enough to address the problem? What other action is taken? So anytime there is an environmental summit, you will have groups from all over the world mobilizing, environmentalist groups from all over the world mobilizing on these same issues and coming together at these summits to compel politicians from all these different states to produce some substantial action that would satisfy these environmental groups. So this is again a force of convergence, because you can't, as a politician, you can't go at it alone. You can try, but that's probably going to get you into a bit of controversy among voters. Another interesting force of convergence here concerns the media. Of course, we learn so much of what we know and think about the world from the media, and the media landscape has been so profoundly affected by the rise of the internet and communication technology, this electronic age that offers viewers so many alternatives. In the mid 20th century, you were pretty much limited to watching what the state would produce for you on public TV, or what you could pick up by your television receiver in terms of the range of the broadcasting tower, effectively. If you could pick something up across a border with your receiver, then you could watch TV from another country. Today, these technological limits are not really there anymore, unless a government tries to limit access to the internet. There is such a great range of alternatives for anyone who wants to, that the building of awareness raising around global issues and issues of governance has been so dramatically facilitated by this, of course. So the communication technology, what it does to the media and how it facilitates awareness raising and political mobilization on a global level is really a significant change, and another force that effectively globalizes politics, because of course you will find a great range of social movements that are mobilizing on a global level and doing manifestations on a global level. For instance, you have the feminist group Femen that has had activities all across Europe and are communicating with sympathizers all across the world. thanks to these kinds of media. I've added pop culture here. It might seem strange to add that to a political science discussion on globalization, but it's really formative in so many ways for how people perceive the world and how what type of arts and memes really that spread in public space. We can all today watch pretty much the same sports, music, same movies, and so on, which really does suggest that the world is shrinking, and how quickly popular tastes can change. The dramatic rise of the Gangnam Style in in a matter of days speaks to the rapidity of communications today in comparison to the mid 20th century, for instance. Policymaking at last. So more often than we may like, politics in the age of globalization might be just as random as the wheel of fortune. And by that, I mean that politicians tend to very often find the solutions they need to address a short-term problem based on the solutions they have at hand. This is a classic issue in politics, really. There is not always the capacity to do long-term planning in politics, very much because of all these reasons that I've been discussing with the quick information flow and so on. Voters will expect fast action in some cases. But there is also the issue of having information to be able to properly address an issue, to be able to properly address a political problem. So if you want to forge a coherent policy, you need to know how people will react to your policy proposal, and politicians will not always be able to predict how a certain proposal will be received in the social media. And of course, social media reacting as fast as it can with the very limited space for debate that it has. Twitter has a very limited number of characters, can very much affect policymaking in both good and bad ways. It can increase transparency, but it can also mean that politicians become increasingly focused on doing short-term solutions that satisfy voters over the short term just to avoid political controversy. One question coming out of all these different forces of convergence is the issue of, is globalization making us more similar or more different? And that's something to keep in mind as you keep working on the topic of globalization. In any given city right now, you can in the world, you can watch the same type of movies, go to the same type of fast food restaurants, buy the same type of clothes, and listen to a debate about global warming and climate change through CNN. And the politicians will thus have to deal with pretty much the same type of issues, regardless of where they might be. And this is really a sign that we're becoming more similar. But on the other hand, there are also persistent differences due to political systems, due to political culture, due to geography and resource base, and so on. So think about similarities and differences as you proceed working on this topic. I hope this overview was useful.